All right, so welcome to everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining what I think is going to be a very interesting hour, leadership in an exponential age. It's two topics that I'm fascinated by. One is leadership, how to do it. I didn't think I did it particularly well. Others out there are absolute geniuses in the way they can motivate people, but particularly thinking about how that changes or doesn't in a world which, to me at least, seems like it's radically different to anything that we've seen before. Joining me on this conversation is Herman Singh. Herman, I've known for many years now, and he's always been at the cutting edge of innovation, whether that's in corporate, working for large listed organizations like MTN and Standard Bank, and trying to move these massive, massive tankers into a more innovative mindset. I'm very interested about how that transforms now as we look forward, where it seems that innovation needs to be a lot more adaptable and a lot more nimble. Herman's also well known for his lecturing. He's got his own company, Future Advisory. He seems to be living his life on a plane, as far as I can work out from following him on LinkedIn. And somehow he manages to fit in a number of board seats as well. So, with that, Herman, welcome.
Thank you, Colin. It's great being here with you. I'm really looking forward to engaging with you and your audience.
Now, before we kick off, just a quick reminder to the audience that let's make this interactive. Please do feel free to ask your questions as you go through, and I, as always, will do my best to try to make sure we at least get through some of them. But let's start just by where we are this last week. It was interesting just in the build up to this, Herman, hearing how busy you are. What keeps you busy in the last week or two? I think it's a very good frame of reference to give context for your perspectives.
Yeah, no, thank you. Look, I have multiple pillars in what I do. I joined the boards of a number of companies that were basically, they were challenging companies. They were state companies that needed help, or they were traditional companies that had got themselves into a bit of a hole. So I joined their boards basically because I felt that I could make a difference. I wanted to see at Telcom, I wanted to see Telcom moved from a state-owned company to a privatized company. African Bank, as you know, was a bank that failed, and I wanted to join the board to help. We are looking at listing this company, and how do we take a bank that had failed ultimately through to a successful listing? And so last week was hectic because all three of the boards that I sit on, we hit our financial year end. So I was very, very busy with board meetings and shareholder presentations at stock exchanges, etc. And all of them had very positive results. When I'm not doing that, I'm obviously doing a lot of facilitation. Today, I'm actually facilitating a session for an industrial company on how do you industrialize the supply chain of an industrial supply company. And during the course of the week, I worked with Society Generale and a number of big advisory businesses globally, helping them think about how AI is going to transform their business in the future. So yeah, that's really what I've been doing. And also, in a business like mine, I'm always selling while I'm executing, while I'm designing content. So there's always a little bit of a split between all three.
So that's on the bit on the business side, and what about on the family side? Where do you fit family in? I believe you've got four children, is it?
Yeah, it was good. I had two of my own, and then my wife, my current wife, we married about 11 years ago. She had two kids, so I've got this really interesting thing. It's something they don't warn you when you marry into an Afrikaans family, is that children who are 4 and 6 years old eventually turn into giraffes. So they were really cute and cuddly. It's I think it's like adopting a dog. Some dogs are huge, the size of horses, and you don't realize this when you get them as puppies, and suddenly there's no room on the sofa. So that's kind of what happened with my two youngest. But yeah, so I do, obviously, it's Father's Day coming up, so I specifically made sure I didn't have any work on Father's Day. But I do try to make sure that I'm always, I'm cycling with my eldest son. I'm talking to my eldest daughter is a lawyer, so we're always talking about, a cyber law. My youngest daughter is hoping to be an Instagram model, and we're always talking about tech and new age media. And my youngest son is at university in Poch, actually studying pretty much what I do, which is helping companies think about risk in a technology-driven world.
Lovely. Well, you've mentioned tech. Let's get into the detail now. What is the world like in terms of tech? For me, at least, it feels radically different to just 5 or 10 years ago. What's your take?
Yeah, that's a great question, Colin. And I often, having lived long enough, you start to see certain patterns emerge. And I do feel that we've got to balance on the one side hype and hope, and on the other side the fact that technology in and of itself is not what gives you competitive advantage, and it also is not what threatens you. It's the way that you use the technology that threatens you. And advisory businesses and technology companies have a profit motive to keep creating the next big hype cycle. So we constantly, creating new hype cycles. I'll give you an example. When I joined Standard Bank, I joined as the director of online services, and we built internet banking because we didn't even, the concept of internet hadn't even really grasped it. We didn't even know what e-commerce was. So we called it online, and online was the word we used at the time. By the time I'd moved to, halfway through my career, it became e-commerce. Then when I moved to Vodacom, I was the chief digital officer at Vodacom, it became M-commerce. And we were all, I was now the managing executive for M-commerce. Then I moved to MTN, and I was then the group chief digital officer. So now it became digital commerce. And here I am sitting today, and we're now talking about AI native telecommunication companies. So I do feel there's a lot of hype around this. If I look at fundamentally what is changing, everything's changing, obviously. And the thing to think about is the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. So if you look at the way that finance works, auditing, compliance, regulatory compliance, that doesn't change very quickly. If you look at the way that outbound sales is working, the way we're running marketing campaigns, the way that we're looking at cybersecurity and fraud, that is changing incredibly fast. So the way I like to think of this is think of an organization like an iceberg, and technology is the sun. And what's happening is the iceberg or the snowbank is melting, but in the center of the iceberg is melting very slowly. At the edges of the iceberg is melting very fast. And that is exactly what I'm seeing in organizations all over the world, that technology is having this impact. The edge of the organization is having to change frantically, the boundary, the firewalls, the sales organizations, the apps, the fraud detection, the detecting money laundering, doing credit scoring, managing customer journey, that customer interface, the way we're managing advisory, customer interactions, that's changing rapidly. Go to the center and go and look at the way internal audit, risk compliance, and regulatory work, and even financial reporting operates, and even HR works. That's changing at glacial speed. So definitely a tale of two-speed digital transformation, I would say.
I think this is a little bit different, though. I mean, we've talked about AI. I don't want to just chat about AI for the whole call, unless people keep asking questions about it. But let's start there because it is revolutionary. Everyone's using it. ChatGPT, the fastest growing user base in the world ever. I think it's up to, what is it, 100 million or more users now just in the space of 12 months or less. I mean, it's incredible. And then you've got a plethora of other platforms that people are starting to use as well, Gemini and Perplexity. And, the kind of list is endless. If we just think about what's happened over the last couple of months, there's a really big promotion now for agentic AI. Salesforce are obviously pushing this out in their marketing left, right, and center, but we're seeing agentic AI and these agents starting to be really promulgated as the next generation of our workers in large corporations, literally replacing people with machines, reducing or replacing salary with energy costs. So when I look at that from afar, it feels like this is a technology which, for the first time ever, could make quite rapid change, both in the core and on the extremities of organizations over the next couple of years. What's your view?
So it's, in a sense, agentic AI is actually an admission that actually general AI is not here yet. Right? That's what it's saying. It's saying that you're not going to have a financial advisor doing everything, but a financial advisor might have an agent that might manage their diary, that might manage the analysis of a portfolio, that might put together a portfolio proposal. In other words, task-based AI, right? And also goal-seeking AI. So what this is in a sense is it's quite a big jump, but it's parallel to the migration from robotic process automation. Think about what RPA was. RPA was, how can we look at the work where people are logging into multiple systems and following a very standard workflow and stitching together this complexity in the messy middle? And RPA solved that very elegantly, I thought, right? Very simple system. You don't have to do big system integrations. Solved it. And today, there are millions of RPA implementations running globally. I mean, I was talking to a bank this week, and they said, don't talk to us about RPA. We've got thousands of RPA applications or instances running. And I think that's done. What we're now starting to see is we're saying, if you look at RPA was implemented for formulaic work. It's work where it's basically rules-based logic. So wherever we had rules-based logic, a very clear algorithm, RPA made sense. Now what we're seeing with agentic AI is we're moving from rules-based logic to data-based logic. So in other words, where inferences have to be drawn, where you have to actually solve a problem using data, and you have to analyze data to actually extract the business rules. Business rules don't exist. Because if business rules exist, the easiest thing to change into software is a business rule. So where you've got process-driven logic, you have business rules, and where you have business rules, it's easy to go to software. Now you start with data-driven logic. Now it's much harder to go to software. So what you really want is you want adaptive software, which is what agentic AI is. So you can put an agent in and say, here's my goal. My goal keeps changing. I don't have a defined flowchart. I don't have a defined decision tree. There isn't a pre-designed expert system. What I want you to do is I want you to go out and solve this general problem, but within a very narrow domain. And that's what agentic AI is, very narrow domain. And it's saying, I can't give you the business rules. They don't exist. You have to go and figure them out. Now, if you look at the journey of AI, this is the journey we've been on for a while. If I go back to, when I first started work building analytical models and automation models and Monte Carlo simulations, what we were doing was we had this dual path of one part said, can I create an algorithm of decision logic where cause and effect are clearly established? And where that's true, I can write software, and I can build a decision tree. Expert systems are built like that. If then else networks are built like that. And a huge portion of the work, by the way, 99% of the work fits very nicely into that domain and doesn't need to be changed. What's happening now is this new age of work where it's data-driven, and this is where agentic AI is having a big impact. The big challenge we have, though, Colin, is how are you going to deal with the risk, and when do you know that it's market ready, and how do we deal with the role of the human, which we can talk about more going forward. But that's at a very high level. That's my sense of what agentic AI is and where it's going.
Do you think that's offering a lot of opportunities and equally a lot of risks for incumbent organizations? If I think last month, Y Combinator, I was listening to those guys on a podcast, and they were chatting about how on their startup community, pretty much every single one of their startups is doing vibe coding. Very few of their startups are actually doing physical code writing. They're all using platforms like Replit and Windsurfer and others to just storyboard what it is that they want, and using agents effectively to go and create the code and the applications. So they're going from idea to proof of concept to MVP in the space of days, literally days now, whereas before obviously it would take months, or it'd be perhaps even impossible. You're going from having to spend hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in terms of startup venture capital backing on these ideas to get them up and running to it's kind of nothing. I mean, 2 people and whatever the subscription is for some of these platforms. So in the startup space, this is making a huge difference. I think it's revolutionized it. Are you seeing the same coming through into large corporates, and what's the impact of these technologies for large corporates?
In large corporates, we are suffering from the disease, the endless cycle of proof of concepts. And that's in a lot of applications that I've seen. And we've got to be very careful here, because what we've done in corporates is we've suddenly taken our credit scoring system and we've renamed it AI. We've taken our fraud detection system and renamed it AI. We've taken our anti-money laundering system, we've renamed it AI. They're not AI. They're basically advanced analytical engines that we've just branded them. So that's the first thing that's very important to point out. A lot of what you're seeing when people talk about AI in big corporates is certainly that. Now, what they are doing is they are conducting a lot of experiments. Nobody's conducting huge experiments at scale. Organizations that have tried, go and look at what Klarna did, for example. Klarna took out 700 employees. And I'm going to use Klarna as they're not a startup anymore. They're looking at IPOing for 30-40 billion. They've unfortunately stumbled quite badly because of what just happened. But what they did was they replaced human operators, 700 human operators and people in the credit line with these agentic AI, and they had a huge pushback from customers, number one, and they also had problems in the execution of credit scoring. So I think there are big risks, and the challenge is the following. If you're in a startup, your downside risk is incredibly low. If you're in a corporate, your downside risk is massive. In fact, you could end up with an existential crisis. And by the way, there's an entire litany of companies that have tried scaling agentic AI, for example, and they've had huge problems, right? You've seen them use it for copywriting and dealing with customers, answering customer queries, creating new products. And the problem is you can fail at scale. So all of them, therefore, have reverted to creating sandboxes, point solutions. And in every case, and this is really important, in every case, there's a man in the middle, there's a human being in the middle to monitor, to manage the risk. A lead indicator of this, that this is going to be an area of investment going forward, is the very large amount of money that the four big auditing companies are spending on auditing AI implementations. So if you ask me, where's the big money going to be in the future? One of the big profit opportunities in the corporate space is all of these companies are investing hundreds of millions of dollars building the capability to audit an AI. Why? Because AIs hallucinate, they have biases, they're prone to jailbreaking, and there's a whole bunch of issues around the problems that they have, and somebody better be able to audit them, because the lack of explainability problem is a challenge. Even with new causal-based AI systems, they still struggle with that. So we need to have an audit trail, because when something goes wrong, we need to understand why. So I think corporates are doing it. They're doing it fast. They're doing it multiple smaller implementations, always with humans in the loop, monitoring the risk, trying to establish cause and effect. And the auditing companies are chasing them with these auditing systems to have them ready, because when they go into production, you're going to need to have these in play. I can tell you now, I sit on, as I said, the boards of a number of companies, and at the audit committee, I've in fact challenged auditing companies, because one of the auditing companies, I'm not going to tell you who, said to me, "Oh, we've used AI to conduct your audit." I immediately jumped on top of this, and I said, "So tell me where you're using it. Tell me how you built it. Tell me, are you going to take our data and put it into your auditing engine? Who else is going to have access to our data? Are you going to use our data to enhance your model going forward? When you bring your model into my environment, are you using my competitors' data to audit my environment? Because you need to disclose all of these things to me." They backtracked incredibly fast and said, "Actually, we're just doing advanced analytics." So there's a lot of hype. When I've pushed on it and scratched, I'm afraid it's just paint.
A lot of hype at the moment. What's your advice for leadership teams in corporates then? Especially because corporates can take years just to go through the decision making before they're going to do something, let alone
Yeah.
keep up with a startup that spins up a new product or service in 2 or 3 months. Let's use a banking example. I was listening to Brad King the week before last. He did a very interesting presentation down here in South Africa. And really, he was highlighting that the world of fintechs surpassing what's happening in banking has kind of already happened. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, not some management, but everything else, every other measure, revenue, margin, number of customers, new bank over 100 million customers, So they've already surpassed what's happening in traditional banking. Assets under management is next. But actually, the new type of fintech is going to be this agentic type of fintech, where it's even smaller. It'll be 10 robots working for 5 people and actually starting to scale in that way. And I know a couple of guys that are actually looking into that space. That feels really, really destructive for the value of existing banks and existing players in that market. The sense I'm getting from you is that it's not quite as bad or disruptive or doomsday for large incumbents as perhaps I'm projecting.
So the challenge you have is that digital transformation is not really about technology engineering. To a large extent, it's about social engineering. It's about the willingness of customers to change. If I go back 25 years ago, I was part of the team that launched Standard Bank Internet Banking. And after spending at the time, it was 120 million rand, 6 months, a year into the journey, we only had 50,000 customers, and they were all young developers. So the challenge that we had was we didn't have any uptake. We spent the money, we just didn't have customers. So there was customer reluctance to adopt this new technology. A very similar thing happened with remote working. With remote working, in 2005, I was part of the team that deployed South Africa's first BlackBerry. Now, that BlackBerry Exchange server in 2005 was deployed to Standard Bank with MTN. It had Peter Wharton-Hood in the advertisement holding this BlackBerry. And we said, wow, it's going to change the world. We're all going to work from home. Nobody worked from home. We had dongles, we had laptops, we had Outlook web access, we had Blackberries, nobody worked from home. Then for 20 years, nothing happened. Suddenly we got COVID, and within a month, every IT team in the world swung 90% of their employees over. In other words, they didn't build that stuff. That stuff's been sitting there for 20 years. It was a social problem. So people don't change because something is possible and something is important. They change because something is mandatory, it's convenient, and it's urgent. So young people are adopting Nubank, for example, because Nubank offers a fantastic proposition. And Brazil, I think, is a very open country. They've launched some amazing new, open banking, for example, payment systems. WhatsApp's payments is working beautifully in Brazil. Same thing's happening in India. Those legacy banks in those territories are under risk. Those banks are all counting on assets under management, exactly as you said. And who has those assets? Older people. And they're counting on the fact that older people are not going to be changing as quickly, right? And that older people are going to be more risk averse. They're not going to switch over. So I think banks are counting on that. They're already seeing this massive hemorrhaging of younger customers to these new age banks. And I think over time, it's inevitable what's going to happen. It's very likely, in fact, that some of these big banks are going to have to be broken up into smaller banks. That's the one challenge. I also think these new age banks offer very bespoke services. Many of them are very specialized. I think you're going to start to find mergers. You're going to find these banks becoming more what I would call universal banks. What do I mean by that? You need access to corporate funding to help the retail bank. You need access to lazy deposits in the retail bank to fund corporate loans. You need lazy deposits. So you got to get salaries paid. And so universal banks work really well if you can put them together, but there isn't a digital startup building a universal bank. All of them have built, thin retail banks, skinny corporate banks. None of them have built this kind of combined, integrated, aggregated whole. So that's the one point. The other point, just to close out on, is your comment about AI-driven startups being leaner and meaner. I think that's spot on. And your ability to go quickly from idea to design. I think we're living in a world where we are moving towards where we had software as a service. We're now moving to a world where we're going to have results as a service, right? In other words, you're going to say to the agentic AI, I want a trip to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh. I'm flying on this date, ending on that date. Bring me my itinerary with all my tickets paid for. You're going to give it your credit card details. It's going to give you results as a service. Now, that's quite scary because then you could say, build me a website, build me an app, build me a business. And I had to do a presentation at one of the big five, one of the big four auditing companies. And I said to them, who are you most afraid of? And they gave me a really interesting comment. They said, in one of our entities, a number of partners resigned from the auditing company, left, and they're building a competitor that's totally AI driven with just AI agents. And we are petrified because we employ hundreds of thousands of people. And this agentic AI could, in fact, completely outperform us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and we're seeing exactly the same type of fear in law firms and a lot of the services industries, which were based around knowledge, where the brand is still a driver. I'm still wanting to use this brand of a particular law firm. It could be Clifford Chance in the UK or Bowman's Hill or whoever. But actually, I don't need the people anymore. If the brand is strong, I'm very happy if they're using. In fact, I'd prefer them to be using large language models and agentic agents to actually go and get the job done. So it's not surprising that you're seeing that in the accountancy side of things as well. So what should the senior leadership team do? Just trying to put this together. You're sitting. Let's start with the board, because at the end of the day, the board is a critical function in dictating to large corporates exactly how they should behave. And one of the things that I've always felt for decades now, this isn't a recent phenomena, is that on the board there's lots of thoughts around control and risk management and making sure the leadership team is playing within the swim lanes of whatever they've agreed that organization should do. But there hasn't been much board involvement in terms of, guys, you've got to take more risk. You need to be more adventurous. If you don't do a certain level of innovation and allocate innovation budget, you might not have a business in 5 or 6 years' time. What's your take? Am I being unfair to board members there? I mean, you sit on lots.
It depends on the board, right? If you're in a highly regulated industry, like banking, for example, it's really all about surveillance and control. It really is. It's about, it's so highly regulated. You have meetings with the I mean, I had a meeting yesterday for one of my boards with the banking regulator of South Africa. And we were taken to task on certain things and complimented for certain things. And so, what does the regulator want to see? The banking regulator wants to see conservative banking practices. That they want to see inclusion. They want to see sustainable, viable banking models. Banks must make money. It's critical. Otherwise, the whole industry is in trouble. And what they don't want to see is systemic risk. They don't want to see a bank get into trouble, as I said, I sat on the bank that got into trouble and we had to be rescued. So regulators are very concerned about systemic risk in the banking industry. Go to the telecom industry, it's quite different. The telecom industry wants to see inclusion and they want to see data prices dropping, they want to see mass rollout, and they want to drive innovation. So they are saying, guys, please, whatever you can do to innovate, go and innovate. Now, that's not true for all countries. Go to Nigeria or India, you cannot launch a product in telecoms without the government's approval. You come up with a product in Nigeria or in India in the telecoms industry, the government has to approve the product. You go to India and you try to launch an insurance product, the regulator has to approve that product. So the first challenge you've got in some industries is you've got to deal. There are very strong regulators who in fact have moved. I would argue, have moved a little bit from oversight to overreach. Now, in industries where that's not the case, certainly what you are seeing is boards are certainly pushing very hard to say, look, we need 3 horizons. Every board is now sitting looking at a 3 horizon model. Horizon 1 is show me what you're doing to implement simple, mature technology that is might be new to the bank or telco or retailer, but not new to the industry. And we are solving a problem that might be new to the bank, right? Or might not be new to the bank. So it's an existing problem in the bank, but we're using technology we've never used before. So Horizon 1, we would like to see, please spend a lot of money on efficiency, drive costs down, drive speed up, drive replicability and industrial strength, right? So that's Horizon 1. And I would argue that 80% of the board's attention is on Horizon 1. Horizon 2 then says, look, we need to be spending money looking at technologies that are new to the industry, okay, and solving problems that are also new to the market. Now, that's probably taking up about 15% of the board's attention. And also, we are arguing as board members, you need to swing your investment over. You can't just spend money defending and building the business of today. You've got to look at adjacent businesses, new emerging customer needs, and you've got to move quickly. So we are pushing for more proof of concepts, more rapid rollout, more experimentation, because that's how you establish causality. So Horizon 2 is really about effectiveness. So Horizon 1 is about doing things right. Horizon 2 is about doing the right things. Let's move into adjacencies. Let's find new problems that have never been solved, and let's use new technology, new to us and new to the industry to solve it. Horizon 3 is when we're now solving problems that are new to the world using technology that's new to the world. Right. So in other words, this is not brand new stuff. We are building agentic, and no, this is new. No one's ever done this. When people come to me and they say, so Herman, show me who's done this. The answer is nobody has. When I go to Horizon 1, I base all of my decisions on good practice and best practice, right? Because I can show you textbooks on how to run Horizon 1. When I go to Horizon 2, then there are no textbooks, but there's lots of books, right? In other words, people have written books about point solutions. This bank's done this telco's done this retailer's done this. Horizon 2 is about emergent practice. Look at these people, look at what they're doing, look at these new things that are emerging. Horizon 3 is about novel practice. And novel practice means you are going to be the first person in the world to do this. You are going to write the book. So I think all businesses have to have these 3 horizons. And I'm encouraging boards all over the world to start thinking about it like this, where you go 80% on Horizon 1, 15% to 70% on Horizon 2, and kind of 3 to 5% on Horizon 3.
Do you think those percentages are fit for purpose? In the old days where progress was somewhat linear, that sounds quite reasonable. Maintain your existing business and work out how to scale it and be more efficient. And then Horizon 2, let's try to be a bit adaptive, and I don't know, we can, expand into other markets, or we can take our platforms and see if we can recycle them as something else, like an AWS, for example. Horizon 3, yeah, no one ever got to Horizon 3. Now we're in a world where Horizon 3 is here, and Horizon 3 is going to be kind of everywhere in a year or two's time. Agentic agents may not be working today, but if we listen to the likes of, Sergey and the rest of the guys sitting over in Silicon Valley, in 12 months' time, this picture is wildly different. And
Sure.
so we're gearing up for that now.
So I'm seeing an entire spectrum of views, right? I'm seeing people saying, 50% of all entry-level jobs are gone in the next 2 years. And then I've seen a Nobel laureate economist say, listen, AI is only going to impact GDP by 1%, jobs by 1% and GDP by 5% by 2030. Now, those are two extreme views. And the first view was from the
Don't
head of an AI company. Yeah.
Herman, don't go with economists. We know
Yeah,
that.
but so the point is, there's an entire range, and you've got to start by asking, well, what's the agenda behind the statement? So if a vendor who's selling AI is selling you this huge, the sky is going to fall, well, I think you have to apply some filters to that. So I think most organizations are saying, look, the best thing to do is to go out and build. Look, listen, learn. You better get your hands wet. You better learn how to swim. You better go out and start spending money training people. This is not a risk you can ignore. You cannot say, I'm going to just wait and see. You got to suck it and see. You got to dive in, start building these things in different applications, and then start looking and then monitor. Monitor what your peers are doing, monitor what the startups are doing, and monitor what the leading edge companies are doing. You just got to monitor that and start to see, who's making the most progress and copy them. Now, I don't know if you watch Formula One, but in Formula One, it's really interesting what happens when it rains. Because when it rains, all the teams have to rush into the pits and change from slick tires to either intermediates or wet weather tires. Now, everyone's on the same tire. Now, the big competitive advantage is watching when is the time to change back. Because when you go back from a full wet to an intermediate or an intermediate back to dry, whoever does that first gets a huge advantage. So what happens? The leaders do nothing. They're waiting for someone else to go and try this first. The minute somebody tries it and spins off and crashes, they know it was too early. They say, no, clearly it's too early to change. And they'll watch the smaller players try. The minute one of the smaller players come right, all of the big boys immediately pull into the pits and change their tires. Why? Because now we know what works. We've got proven evidence that this is delivering real business value on a business case. Now we need to invest billions. And I think that's how a lot of the players are trying to be fast followers, while at the same time saying, look, there are some elements where there's a compelling argument that you need to disrupt yourself. For example, right? I'm in two organizations where credit is a big issue. In one of my boards, I think it's 1 in every 5 rands of revenue is actually sold on credit. It's a telecommunications company. 20% of our revenue is based on credit. Banking and the other board I sit on, we've got a lot of credit, right? And we've got, unlike many banks, in our bank, we've got a lot of unsecured credit. So we've got incredibly sophisticated models because there's no security linked to those loans. Now, in both of those environments, we have unsecured loans. So in other words, what you got to start to model, you can't build a credit model based on show me what collateral you've got, show me what your income is. These a lot of them are very small loans. So your cost to score the loan is going to be enormous. So what you have to do is you have to use non-traditional data. And you've got to start building non-traditional engines, because what you're modeling is no longer ability to repay a loan, but you're modeling willingness to repay a loan. You're modeling psychographic behavior. And now AI is really powerful in this space, right? So if you go and look at Klarna, for example, Klarna's got this buy now, pay later model, which in theory is interest-free, but I mean, interest is baked in somewhere. But the point is, they don't ask you for a copy of your payslip and proof of address when you're checking out on eBay. If you click on buy now, pay later, they'll credit score you based on your social media history, based on your browser, your device, your previous buying behavior, and they'll issue you credit. Now, that is the world that we're moving to. And for that, we need powerful data. In my days in the telco industry, where I was actually in a chief digital officer, we had 200 data points on every customer. And people have no idea how much data a telecommunications company has on you. We know what time you go to sleep at night, what time you wake up in the morning. We know your wife's number and your girlfriend's number. And we know who you phone more. We know, whether you're outbound calling, inbound calling, whether you've got family in rural areas. We know what route you take to work. So in other words, you've got all this data. And what's hidden in that data is very clear indicators. of whether you are likely to repay a loan. And after doing the analysis, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there were 2 data points. After all this analysis, 2 data points were very clear indicators that you were a very good credit risk. Now, this is the kind of application that AI is going to be fantastic for. And I see I see all the banks in the world chucking billions of dollars into improving credit scoring, because we have to move into this world where I think there's an enormous profit pool.
What do you think about the CEO community? Do you think they've got to change? I mean, a key role of the board is to pick the right CEO and to
Yeah,
get
lovely
leadership.
question. I'm not sure if you aware of this, but there's already a company where the CEO is an AI. And
Seen example, you've got AI as a CEO, where you've got AI as an advisor, especially in private equity and
yes,
investment companies. You're seeing
yeah.
those coming through. I'm waiting for something in the manufacturing space or the banking space. We might be a few years away from that.
Yeah. Look, I think the issue of this, there's a challenge for the CEO, I guess, is, and the CEO is under these really conflicting pressures. And let me point something out that people don't realize. You know, the average tenure of a CEO in the United States on a listed company, large listed company, is slightly over 3 years. If it's a medium-sized company, it's maybe 4 years. But that's the average, which means that most CEOs are joining, spending 6 months figuring out what to do, implementing some of what they do, and then moving on once the results come in. So because of this 3-year horizon is the problem. That's the first problem. The second problem that you've got is, if you have a look at the S&P 500, you realize that the tenure, the average duration, average stay of a company, the tenure of a company within the S&P 500 has dropped by 80%. It used to be 60 years. A company got into the S&P 500, stayed in the index for 60 years. Today, they stay in the index for 20 years or 12 years. It's plummeted. And and part of the challenge you have, the reason for this, is the high level of turnover of CEOs, number one. And number two, the fact that all of these companies are being measured on quarterly results and 6-monthly dividends. Now, the minute you apply these short-term goals onto a listed company, you are immediately constraining their ability to make radical investments. You know, if you look at Michael Dell and Elon Musk, both of them had listed companies. Both of them had to make radical investments. Both of them delisted their companies and said, I cannot do what I have to do in the light of the public scrutiny, because you will penalize me, because I'm not going to pay dividends. I'm going to have retained earnings. I'm going to reinvest my capital. I may make losses, and I may even raise more capital going forward. So you will penalize me if I do this. You will hammer my share price. It makes more sense for me to take the business off the stock exchange, do the radical engineering, and then bring it back. I expect to see a lot of that happening going forward, because then we will see CEOs having longer tenure. Right? Because the CEO's job is to make sure that they hit the next quarterly numbers, right? And balancing that with the pressure coming down, saying, I need you to play with this very disruptive, dangerous technology, potentially dangerous, where the business case, there's no business case yet. I'm still waiting to see the business cases rolling out. CEOs have to say, look, you know, I've got to deliver to customers, I've got to deliver to shareholders, I've got to deliver to the board, I've got to take the middle road. And so the challenge that you're going to have is to find those CEOs who are brave enough and astute enough to find those profit pools where you can start to build the business case, and you can turn ideas into business equity in the world of AI rapidly. Those are going to be very rare AI CEOs who truly understand how AI works and where to use them and how to manage the risk.
All right, so Deepak's asked a question. How do you see social user adoption of AI-based applications in South Africa and banking, considering the cost of building LLMs is considerably higher to justify? This is about the
Sorry,
social.
it's about the social?
The social aspects of technology. How do you see social user adoption of AI-based applications in South Africa? Let's use the example that you used before. So waking up in the morning and saying, I've got a 2-week trip to Saudi. I'm just going to go onto my personal AI agent. They're kind of there already. I'm going to ask it the question. It'll do the research. And obviously with the recent announcements from Visa and others that they're going to accept payment requests from AI applications, we're very close to that. So how's that going to actually run in terms of user adoption of AI in South Africa, particularly when you think about our status of having access to data and the cost of some of these applications?
Okay, so that's a great question. Well, let me start off by pointing out. So it depends whether I'm answering this question in the short term or the long term. Because the long term, I think the answer is the same for everyone. In the short term, South Africa might be different. In the long term, cell phones are dead. Really, people need to understand this. Why did Sam Altman a company that's going to hit $10 billion in revenue faster than any other company in the history of business. Why did he spend $6.5 billion buying IO, a company with no product and no revenue? Why did he do that? He did that to buy John Ivey. Who is John Ivey? Because he basically spent $6.5 billion buying a guy. Now, who is this guy? This guy was the key designer at Apple. In other words, he was building the device, the post-smartphone device. And the post-smartphone device is based on agentic AI. Basically, what the argument is, you don't need bandwidth. You don't need data. You don't need a big processor. You don't need you probably need a good radio receiver and you need a good camera. You don't need good memory, because what's burning data? Burning data is what's burning storage capacity is all the apps. The apps have to run locally. The update on the apps, that's burning up data consumption. Your photos can stay in the cloud. Some of them might stay on your device. What you really need is an agentic AI that says, book me a flight to Riyadh. Now, if you have this agentic AI, I've just gotten rid of 5 apps. You don't need these apps, because the agentic AI will decide what apps to use. In fact, it will go directly to the source. All of these apps, remember, are intermediaries anyway. It'll go directly to the source. It'll bypass the apps. And so the app, you don't need an app store. You don't need an app store. You don't need app downloads. You don't need apps running on your machine. You don't need a big processor. You don't need big storage. That's going to fundamentally change the device. So long term, I think we're going to end up with cheaper devices with more powerful agentic AI, and we're going to replace hardware with software and eventually AI-based services. In the short term, I think there's going to be, the social impacts are going to be enormous. The first social impact you're going to start to see is what's called the dead internet theory. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Colin, but the dead internet theory basically says that we're heading into a situation where every person consuming data on the internet is actually a bot, and every entity creating information on the internet is actually a bot, right? So in other words, the internet's dead. It's dead. And if you look at what happened, as we moved, the original internet had 90% of the internet was human-to-human interaction. About 3 years ago, we reached a point where 60% of the traffic on the internet is machine-to-machine communication. We're now going to get to the point where in the next 5 to 10 years, I believe you're going to have agentic to agentic communication. It's not going to be humans on the internet as such. It's going to be agents on the internet. That's where we are heading to. So that's going to have an impact in the sense that that people in South Africa need to get used to the fact that the internet itself is going to change. You're going to start to find that a lot of the posts on Facebook are going to come from agents, and a lot of the responses on Facebook are going to come from agents. So where the people and branding companies are going to go crazy. Social media is going to explode and then implode, because people are going to go, well, I'm not sure why I'm here. Security risks are going to dramatically increase. And I think cybercrime and identity theft is going to be enormous, and social engineering of frauds is going to be huge, because you've already heard of the lady who was defrauded with somebody who managed to convince her that he was Brad Pitt. Well, I think you're going to see that multiplied by 100 million times. So there are going to be huge social impacts. Also, don't forget that we're going to start to see jobs being replaced. There's no question. Any job that's very formulaic, any job that's rule-based, formulaic, repetitive, low risk, predictive, where cause and effect are easily connected to each other, that job's in huge trouble. And my advice to people is to say, look, you need to really start thinking about repurposing yourself and building new skills for a new world.
That's a good point you raised there. Let's put it back to, and that's why I asked about your children at the start. I'm a little bit worried about my kids. I've got 4 kids as well, and thinking about what they're going to do. I'm not worried about senior partners in law firms, because they can still use their brand and go and hire some agentic agents. But I am worried about those junior kids coming out of universities and thinking, great, I've got to go in, because the job they will go into is repetitive, systemic, copyable, because that's how they go and get their learnings about whatever it is they're going to go and do. And then 10 years down the track, they're really allowed to move into those more senior roles where they can be more creative in their thought process. There's going to be proper dearth of those junior roles if you look at the doomsday side of things. What's your advice to your kids or kids in general as they're sort of looking at this?
Yeah, so I believe that the job, and this is the advice I've given to all of my kids, is focused on 2 big words. And the first word is judgment, and the second word is creative. Those two words I think are very important. So if you look at where AI works very well, it works where you don't need human judgment, right? And I mean, go and look at this plane crash that happened in Ahmedabad. I've been to Ahmedabad twice, and I was horrified when I saw the plane crash. And one doesn't want to speculate, but if you look at the way in which planes fly, 90% of the time that a plane is flying, it's flying under computer control. How does the computer manage to do that? Right? Planes can land using instrument landing and automated control, and they can fly in steady state and automated control. The reason is you were able to build a digital twin that perfectly maps every eventuality, all the boundary conditions are very well understood, and you've totally coupled cause and effect for any external variable, headwind, tailwind, jet streams, turbulence, the minute something happens, engine failure, decompression, immediately you need human judgment. You had the control back. Now, no plane is allowed to take off. No plane is allowed to take off under computer control. Why? There are so many variables. And if you go and analyze the statistics around when planes fly, most planes crash. They crash when they're taking off and when they're landing, and often taking off because they're taking off heavy with a full fuel load. So where do we need human judgment? Wherever we need human judgment, folks, you're going to have a problem because you don't have. It's difficult to replace that with AI because we haven't built the digital twin. When you've built the digital twin, it means I actually don't need human judgment anymore. So in steady state, most planes fly through the night, no human judgment needed. That's great. There is a human there. So I'm telling my children, go into jobs where there's human judgment, or you've got a situation where 99.9% of the time there's no need for human judgment. Be the person that it's escalated to, right? So in other words, be the person that the AI hands back to, saying, this is a very difficult situation. I've blown an engine. You better take over. So be that person, which means you need to be highly skilled, right? You need to understand exactly what the AI is doing, and you need to be able to take over when the AI says, I can't handle this. So that's the one point. And you're going to see this, by the way, a Tesla hands back to the driver when it hits a boundary condition that is not modeled in the digital twin. So that's the one job you have. The second job is around judgment. Is there are many jobs that have a professional requirement. Now, the word professional is really important here, because a professional requirement means it's governed by a professional body, and there's a law, right? You cannot be a lawyer unless you have gone through the program and you've been approved, and there's a law that says you can't practice. Now, because the law is going to protect you and the professional body is going to protect you. Why? Because what you're doing requires a huge amount of sentiment analysis, human value analysis, and the laws of the land have said you can't automate this decision making. We need humans to say, this person was guilty of spousal abuse. What do we do with this person? And you got to use data, and you got to look at facial expressions, etc., and ask the question: is this person repenting? Are they likely to be a repeat offender? There's a huge amount of judgment involved. Well, that's true for architects, engineers, lawyers, auditors. There's a huge amount of judgment, boards of directors, and so judgment. If you want to think about judgment, exists where there's a high level of uncertainty that hasn't been modeled yet. And that's where risk sits. And that's why you need boards, and that's why you need these professions. So that's a great place to focus on. And I believe, by the way, as you roll out more and more agentic AI, you're going to need more of these jobs for oversight. And you're going to have these jobs where you've got judgment that's this residual piece of work. Finally, AI is not really creative to a large extent. It's the word generative is actually a very important word. Generative implies formulaic. And if you look at the way that it works, that's exactly how it works. In my first promotion, I actually got my first promotion because my job was to plan production on what's called a slitting line. And slitting line means you have to pick combinations of widths that you were going to cut on a defined width of steel. And I arrived at this company. Slitting line was 50 years old. And for the last 50 years, they'd come up with 20 combinations or 25 ways of setting up this line. So what I did is I created a Monte Carlo simulation. I said, use any combination and work out for me a universe, explore the entire universe of possible combinations, and give me combinations that have never been thought of yet. And I ended up taking the 20 combinations we had and turning them to 100. And of the 100, 50 of them didn't work, but we ended up with 30 that did. And I basically got promoted the very next day. They said, wow, that's amazing that you could do that. Now, that's what generative AI is doing. It's basically going out and saying, this is how you've been creating up to now. These are the variables that you use. This is the model you're using for creativity. Let me change the models in ways you haven't thought of, and let me create something. Now, that's not that is how some people. A lot of music is formulaic. A lot of movies are formulaic. A lot of books are formulaic. A lot of ads are formulaic. A lot of copy is formulaic. So that's going to work in a lot of industries. That's going to be fine. You can go and do formulaic work if that's what you want. But true creativity is based on emergence of an idea, and that's very difficult to program. And my advice to people is to say, be in touch with the human psyche, be in touch with human creativity, because in the future, that authentic human creativity is going to be difficult to kind of to use an algorithm to create. And that's the kind of advice that I'm giving to people. I hope that answers your question.
Look, I think it's a very difficult question to answer. So thank you for giving it a go. I think if we look forward, it's extremely difficult. We don't really know where things are going, but we do know things are changing. But it opens up another question as well, because we're being sponsored here for this event by Henley, a very prestigious business school. How do you think those guys are going to have to change? They've been central to producing the managers for the last 50, 60, 70 years. What you learn at business school is replicated across the globe now. Whether it doesn't matter if we're talking about the top schools in the US or the UK or here, they're following a formula. Do you think that formula has to change?
There's no question in my mind that every business school in the world is heavily challenged by this. And here's the point. The point is that we're actually in an arms race, right? We're in an arms race. What we're trying to do is we're trying to battle what is known as strategic convergence. When every business school teaches the same theory from the same textbooks, from the same professors, using the same case studies, everyone leaves with the same skills. Now they're working for competitors. They apply the same thinking at two banks. They're competing against each other using exactly the same models. And to be fair, that's just not a system. It's worked up to now, but it's in a sense it's a little bit like a pyramid scheme, right? Because it keeps generating demand for new ideas. So business schools have to realize that what they have to do now is focus on what is different, on teaching them, on identifying new emerging ways of competing that haven't been taught yet. In other words, we've got to stop teaching good practice and best practice, which is what they do. So if you go into a business school and you say, teach me strategy, they'll say, well, there's competitive strategy, corporate strategy, there's competitive strategy, we're going to use Michael Porter's five forces, inside out thinking, systemic thinking. Well, folks, that's good practice and best practice. What is emergent practice? What is novel practice? And I think you're going to find that business schools are going to have to move to emergent and novel practice. They're going to have to do a lot more research. They're going to have to be a lot more at the leading edge. And we've got to be very careful about teaching cases the way we teach them, right? Because, what Coca-Cola does might not be relevant to what ShopRite Checkers does. So we've got to start thinking very carefully about the case studies and linking cause and effect to say that actually I've got to work on the way you think. We've got to start helping people to think about thinking, because that is the problem. People don't think about thinking. They don't. You see, the problem is you teach people how to think. And the problem with that is thinking then becomes unconscious. And, fish don't realize they're swimming in water. And after a while, you're using tools and techniques that are now outdated. But what you don't know how to do is you don't know how to practice strategic forgetfulness. And I think, we've got to teach people how to do that, how to self-manage, how to forget, how to relearn. Unlearn and relearn are going to become very, very critical skills. And we're going to have to help you figure out how to use these tools to build very, very bespoke strategies. And we can't teach this kind of cookie cutter stuff that we've been teaching for these last few decades.
One of the, perhaps this will be the last question. What's your take on corporate venturing? I'm always interested in this because when I look at large corporates, very few, at least in Africa, are doing corporate venturing. Most might do M&A and they might try to go and expand their geography or buy a couple of other companies, but very few are really good at incubating in separate entities new ideas, working in partnerships with startups, or investing in startups, which is a real shame because if I look at Google, they do that very well. Salesforce do that well. In fact, you could look at most of the Fortune 500 and say that many of them are actually significantly enhancing their share price from corporate venturing. In South Africa, I think the only couple that I'm aware of, or Africa, what have we got? We've got Next 176 with Old Mutual. And then it becomes quite difficult, actually. So well done to
Yeah.
Ian Williamson and Mutual for for coming up with that particular idea, but I can't really think of any actually off the back of that. Anyway, what's your kind of take? Is this
Yeah.
just a viable model, but one that actually companies need to definitively start doing? Because I mean, we know you can't innovate from within. Let's be honest here.
Look, the challenge you have is that what do shareholders expect? If I'm a shareholder and I'm buying a share in a telco, I don't want to see that you're running a TV station. I don't want to see that you're running a bank because you're stuffing up my betas on my investment portfolio. I want predictability of dividends and some kind of trajectory for future growth in the share price. Now, I was the chief digital officer for one of the biggest telcos, and we got penalized actually for corporate venturing. Why? Even though it was successful, we built a big e-commerce business. We then got penalized because, well, you're burning cash on an e-commerce business. And so we eventually had to list it and get out of it by listing the business because the investors came to us and said, this thing's becoming huge. So we listed this thing for $1 billion, no, $4 billion, in fact, on the New York Stock Exchange in April of 2019 and exited it. Then we said, okay, we're going to build an insurance company. And this insurance company, today, 25% of everyone in Ghana is a customer of this insurance company. Now, shareholders come to us and say, but hang on, you're now turning into a financial services company, spin this insurance company out. Then we built a big mobile money business, which eventually is going to be worth more than the telco. And again, shareholders are coming to us and saying, but this is now a bank. And regulators coming to you, this is now a bank. You built a big bank. So corporate venturing in that instance led to 3 or 4 massive successes. In every case, either shareholders or regulators or even the board said, you need to exit this has become too big. In very few circumstances did we end up building something that helped our core business to grow. In almost every instance, we ended up growing into an adjacency. And in every instance, it became so big that the shareholders didn't have the appetite to remain in it because they said, look, you guys are becoming a diversified conglomerate and you're actually turning into a private equity company on your own. If we wanted that, we would have gone and bought into a private equity company. So the trick is to be able to create corporate venturing that actually is in your core. That's actually very difficult to do, number one. Number two, you might be better off partnering with companies. For example, at the telco where I'm on a board now, we actually created an incubator program. We went out and we funded all of these businesses. Today, some of these startups have done so well that they are now helping us win new business in our core. And we are now partnering with them and taking them to market. I know one other telco in the IoT space had a similar experience. So I think if you can build businesses that are close to the core, that's fantastic. But it's very difficult to do.
Herman, I think we've probably just about run out of time there. So I just want to say, thank you very much on behalf of Henley and everyone else that's attended for putting in the time. As it kind of probably came clear at the start, time is one thing that you don't seem to have a huge, and I don't think you've managed to go and give up an hour of it to be with us. So I really, really do appreciate that. For everyone that has joined the call, you're welcome to provide feedback. It's always nice in terms of anything on the format and the way we've gone through these things. Just a quick promo. Next up, we're going to be interviewing Chart van der Velde, one of the co-founders of TimeBank. If you don't know TimeBank, it's an awesome story, one of the few unicorns that's come out of Africa. So I'm looking forward to getting their story and also asking some similar questions to that we've given through to you there, Herman, to actually talk about his view in terms of agentic AI and where he sees the future of finance and banking. It'll be interesting to see how much it aligns with yours. So with that, I just will close out. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all soon, and I'll catch up with you as well, Herman, in the near future. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Take care. Bye.